something that caught my attention this week is, oh wait, I need to adjust something real quick. Chat should be, I'm thinking about moving the chat. Ugh, I'm a mess. Just jumped out of the shower and onto here. All right, so first up this week, something that just came out was this Dazine article about how architects need to stand in vocal opposition to the government's segregated toilet proposals. And this caught my attention specifically because, to me, it's a kind of no-brainer hot topic in architecture right now. And it's a question that has invaded a lot of architecture ideas and theories because it involves some kind of direct advocacy that that doesn't really stem from any or need any sort of particular scientific evidence for, but it kind of comes from a moral standpoint or an argument that comes from a kind of what do you call it? Something that I can't place the exact word I'm looking for, but let's get into this story and kind of see what's going on here. The UK government's consultation on desegregated toilets is a direct attack on trans rights, says the United Voices of the World section of Architectural Workers Union. The government's current consultation on toilets places the provision of gender-neutral, desegregated facilities and the safety of trans and gender nonconforming people who rely on them under threat. This consultation is dog whistle politics. Here, let me zoom in a little bit on this. This consultation is dog whistle politics, motivated not by improving access to public toilets, but in suppressing the rights of trans and gender nonconforming people. From the government's pitiful reform of the Gender Recognition Act to the recent ruling, it is another attack on the culture war. This consultation, which people can respond to, seeks to change guidance and even insert new terms into the building regulations that would enforce a clear steer towards facilities segregated by binary sex categories. Okay, so it took me a minute to get into what exactly the argument was here. And let's look for evidence of this. Now, mind you, I'm not in the UK, and so there might be terms, words, politics going on in the UK that are showing up through these articles that people are reading in the language of their government's provisions that I'm unable to read. So I'm going to trust the author here who's saying that these terms are clear, but we could probably find evidence as it is English. And we can look, and they're pointing to the evidence here in this article. So the evidence that they're suggesting is a dog whistle politics. And so what a dog whistle is a something that suggests, or in this case, a dog whistle would be the government suggesting an outcome, suggesting a study be done, but they're really looking for a particular outcome. And they're signaling that they're looking for a particular outcome, maybe in the text itself. Okay? So we're going to look and see if we can find that dog whistle with the author, though I believe they're going to call it out for us. It further seeks, it seeks to change guidance that would enforce a clear steer towards facilities segregated by binary sex categories. So we'll look for that. It seeks to reconsider the ratio of female toilet spaces needed versus the number for men, and pushes for the use of gender-specific language in washroom signage to avoid so-called public confusion. Okay, that's interesting. Anybody in chat, have you ever been confused as to which one is a men's room and which one is a women's room based on their labeling? That's strange. It's strange to even think that would need reform because there are very clear signage requirements, right? Oh, my chat's all not in the right place. Let's put chat down here. I've been thinking. Should chat go up here? Is that too small? So only in weird hipster Brooklyn bars. Yeah. Yeah. Is it maybe sometimes hard to tell where you're supposed to go? Oh, there's an Architect's Journal. That sounds great. I'd love to check out another article. I think that it makes sense. I've got a couple of websites that caught my mind, that caught my attention, that I went to right after this, and I'm gonna go over those. I mean, we're not gonna read through the entire article, of course, but um, what this gets at, what this article is suggesting is that, like, we need to be advocates as architects, right? And there's been a um, you know, there in a lot of architecture history and a lot of theory has been about how to justify architecture as a service and architecture as a public good, right? Hey, um, and like architecture as a service versus architecture as a public good, and you know, there's moral questions like, could you couldn't get a doctor, you couldn't pay a doctor to replace your arm, like switch your arms or do some kind of surgery that people wouldn't do, not because it's necessarily going to kill you, but it's just considered either wasteful or wrong or immoral. Like it's not good for you. Like, could you ask a doctor to amputate your legs because you just don't want them anymore? They work perfectly fine, right? Um, so I'm stretching that thought experiment out into architecture. So, for example, a landlord might ask you to design a building, but it has no windows for the tenants because they're shoved in the back, right? People need housing, so somebody will have to live there, maybe, especially if it's cheap enough. But it's considered, we just consider it a kind of both a moral outrage. It's not really, scientific evidence is hard to say like we absolutely need light or we will like literally die, but it's considered a kind of judgment, right? To say no, people need daylight. And in China, for example, they have laws against that. Only because I'm familiar with it. Because I designed skyscrapers in China, am I familiar with the way that large Chinese cities look? They're not like you see the high rises that doesn't look like Manhattan, right? Because a lot of China's tallest, or a lot of China's cities are tall residential towers, excuse me. And those residential towers are separated by a decent amount of distance. They have podiums and they're separated. That's why the cities look a little bit differently, because of these codes about daylight. Anyway, kind of tangent, but it gets at why architecture is asked to make these judgments, and should be, I think, maybe more vocal about how to get it may be more vocal about architecture's agency in the world, right? What is architecture's agency? We what did we become architects for? We became architects to make the world a better place, make it safer, more beautiful. And these are opportunities to do so. They're opportunities to stand up for people. They're opportunities to create better, more inclusive societies and worlds. We study space. We know, like, architects know history of space. We know the history of what segregation can do to people, populations, families, and or what separate spaces do. Why those kind of spaces exist, right? So, thank you for the article. Let's see if I can get that one. So what I wanted to get, actually what I wanted to open up, is the actual provision. So this is the provision. This is the call for the call for evidence. Technical review on increasing accessibility and provisions of toilets for men and women, right? So automatically, we can look at this provision and read. Do I remember you from your single semester at DAP? I hope I do. I have had a lot of students since then, actually. It's been a while since I've been at DAP, but I hope I do. Oh, wonderful. Somebody typed dist into the chat. Somebody tried to do a distance command. I love that so much. I love that. I'm so happy. More accidental commands in chat, please. Maybe that should be an emoji. Or an emote. Anyway, look, in the summary, it describes technical review on increasing accessibility and provision of toilets for men and women, right? There is already a provisional gendered language in the call in the summary. So that is a type of, I wouldn't call it a dog whistle, but it is a type of it's prospective language based on what they're looking for, right? Why not just say people? It's shorter in language of public writing and or grant writing or any kind of governmental body seeking consultation. It would make sense to make it as short as possible. So the fact that men and women is in the title is already interesting because it's just people. Not my student. Okay. Well, Gabriel, I hope you had a good semester at DAP. So, and what's interesting about the consultation description is how it shows, it signals, and these might be dog whistles, right? It signals that it's interested in creating greater access, right? It signals interest in greater access, but it's utilizing or it's suggesting that access is only made possible by continuing to separate or reinforce gender normative ideas, right? In other words, listen to the way that this is described. Women often have to face excessive queues for toilets or don't have access to appropriate facilities that meet their needs when out. Correct. In some cases, this can mean women are reluctant to go out or take trips that many take for granted. Okay. Right? Who can argue with that? I'm into it. I mean, like, I'm agreeing to it. Yes, let's do something about it, right? Over recent years, what does that mean? That's not specific. There has also been a trend towards replacing female-only facilities with gender-neutral toilets. Okay. The review aims to address this by considering the ratio of female toilets needed versus the number for men, given the need for women to always use cubicles. I guess that's how they say stalls. I don't know. Cubicles does sound nicer. In the United States, we just say stalls, which is maybe that's actually worse. It would also take into account the needs of all members of the community. How? To ensure there is a fair provision of accessible and gender-neutral toilets. How? This review will also look at signage, which should be clearer and use gender-specific language to avoid confusion. Technical comments. Interesting. Like, what's funny about this? Okay, so what's in the call and why people are upset is because the call is clearly already signaling that they believe, or that the call signals the ratio. All right, that's a key word in this. The call signals for a ratio of female toilets needed versus the number for men, and also suggests that the problem So a problem for them are the ratio and also signage, which should be clearer. So those are the two possible the two problems that they're seeing in this description that seem the worst. They don't take into account, they say excessive cues. The problem might be the ratio. The problem might be the signage. Okay. What that's constructing is and then they use nice phrases like this would take into account the needs of all members of the community. I'm not sure how, right? That's unclear because the problems or the possible solutions could be larger than the ones they're suggesting exist, right? So it's what it's called. It's like a baiting. It's baiting. It actually is begging the question, but it's a way of controlling like the possible outcomes of something by suggesting solutions that other solutions exist that you're not willing to suggest, right? So I've got a solution. I've got a solution to these two problems: confusion over where to go, and that the women's line is too long. Right? The ladies' line is too long, and we're going to try to do something about it. And also, the signage is confusing over which should be gender-specific language. Because one, we all know as architects, and I think we know as citizens, if we investigate these claims for just a couple of seconds, when was the last time you were actually confused over which gender was which in a public setting? They're extremely clear, and we as architects have a high level of standards to use when creating signage for restrooms. There's Braille. It's very clear. So. And here's an important point: there isn't a large or a segment of the population, a vocal segment of the population, saying that the clarity is their issue. Right? Can you identify or can you recall or point to a segment of the population whose inability to find the gender-specific language of their signage is the issue for them at toilets? Does anybody know who that might be? I don't, right? But there is a large, a segment of the population who has difficulty choosing which restroom to use because people might, bully you for using one that you're not, you don't appear, right? If your gender identity, or if you're working in a transition, or if your gender identity is such that, people are going to be uncomfortable with your presence, or bully you, or worse, right? That's a problem. That's a problem. Yes. It's not clear. A good question. It's not clear to me, but I'm also not super. It's more clear. These authors, so these two authors, and I will put these in the link in the description, and I can also paste them here in the chat. These two authors have gone through the articles. They're more in touch with the specifics of this provision and what they mean for local politics, or how the language in these things has worked on. I appreciate that, because it's important to be thorough, and it made me interested in. I mean, okay, so I agree with the writers here that segregating water closets are an attack on trans rights, right? It's the kind of attack that we would call attack, to use the word attack to hopefully get people more interested in understanding that this is a problem, right? You use the word attack because it's a threat, and it's a ignoring a problem or ignoring a segment of the population is a form of violence, and it's an attack. So that's why that kind of language would be used, or words are appropriate to say, under the mantle of universal design, segregated toilets are, are old. And you know what? I was actually talking with my wife today about the history of the sex and gender and separating toilets, and really, it's the history of it in the disciplines of gender studies. It's not necessarily about, for men, hiding women so they don't have to hear or see them use the restroom, as much as it's been about men historically seeking to stick together in social situations and create, essentially an escape or a place where they can, continue to hold or segregate themselves from the maybe from the greater public, or from the eyes of the society, the rest of society, right? So it's not even about like being grossed out. That's like, sometimes I try to bounce between like academic means of speaking and just more legible ways of speaking, and using less. More or less language depending on what my audience is. So basically, it wasn't historically about men being grossed out as much as it was about men being like, "Yo, let's pee together, and maybe I'll get that job offer, right? Or maybe I'll get that raise." If you hear things about like guys getting raises because they, I'm not kidding, like took a big dump and their boss was in there, and their boss was like, "Wow, this guy is not this guy's a real go-getter. He doesn't he's willing to take a loud shit when other people are around, because they're not ashamed of their body, whatever." And then they get like a raise or something. There's stories like that out there. Anyway, which of course that's anecdotal, but anecdotes are good ways of attaching legible means of understanding larger societal issues to small stories. They're also, not acceptable as evidence, but what we have as evidence, I mean, there is plenty of evidence about gender's fluid, right? But there's also, and this was something I looked up. Now it's Scientific American and Amanda Montañez article in 2017, which is actually like plenty of long ago, that actually there is a gender spectrum, but also a kind of biological sex spectrum as well. And this graphic is just a resource, right? Some research about gene mutations and different creating a kind of actual sex spectrum, which is very interesting. Hormone treatment, low estrogen, kind of birth defects. I'm looking around, ambiguous genitals, small testes, male internal. Okay, these are, this is real life, So it's not even necessarily sex is, or sex is itself also a kind of spectrum, which I thought was really interesting. Now, how do we as a society cope with all this? And I think I agree with the authors, and I would agree with any architects out there, and I would suggest that a gender neutral public restrooms is kind of feels to me like daylight in an apartment, something that we can argue for as a um, as a value, right? As a kind of value, and that would be sure. Let's share that article. Thanks for asking. Here we go. That's the chart. This is another article. That a value judgment like that would be an important step in righting a lot of, I also think, in righting a lot of wrongs that architecture's relationship to service, and also at the same time writing building code are the two things that are in confrontation with each other at times, right? Because building code, or they can conflict for different reasons. Building code it is a document, right, that carries with it the weight of evidence of things like fire retardant structures and fire exits and health, safety, and welfare, right? And we're guided. Architects, for those who are maybe watching this who aren't as familiar with architects, our guiding words or our guiding code is that we're to look out for the public's health, safety, and welfare. Those are kind of the pledge. And so obviously we have data to back up fire code and all that, but we also have ways of values that we've built into the built world. And for all intents and purposes, you could easily point to the separation of gender as a previous value judgment. There's no scientific evidence or anything that would suggest that that's necessary at all. In fact, it's kind of wasteful, right? So it might be a little bit more difficult to argue for a value judgment as a public document to change society, but I think it's easier to suggest that a previous formulation of a document was a value judgment. Therefore, we can either erase or change or maneuver into a different organization of society by removing or reducing or changing that value judgment inside of code. So I think that's important. I think it's important to recognize that the need to separate men and women in public restrooms is just a value judgment that's inherent to building code. Okay, so watch out for stuff like this. Be vocal and be willing to say, I could solve both of those problems, both of your signage issues, confusion over which gender is which, and I could, make excessive cues go away. And, your building, your space is more efficient. It seems like a valid argument to me. So let's do it. I hope this was helpful. This discussion was helpful towards discussing why that might be a good idea to do. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, interesting. Thanks for the article. How it is fundamentally very different than gender and should not be used as a way to understand human social systems or policy. Great. Oh, no, don't worry. We're going to do one more. This is the first. Yeah, it's okay. Bush IPA. We're not finished. I agree. Start architectural schools requiring all gender restrooms in projects. Totally agree. I have drawn and executed gendered restrooms for a project for professionally. I had no say in the project. I'm a worker, right? I'm executing the drawings of, or executing the design of a boss. And, at that time, though I do feel like finding those offices, or finding, this might be an internal structure to your architecture firm that would work, or that is a way to kind of enter those conversations or have those conversations. And changing having a firm that simply tells a client that that's their value and that that's what they do, I think is smart. And you know what? It also made me think that, well, we've had this is a kind of bigger question, but we've had an issue with architecture and, society, architecture, and justice. And it made me think, like, segregation happened in the United States, and architects were supposed to still, like, architects were architects back. Like, we had architects, and they literally proposed segregation, and it happened. Now, I don't know. It just makes you wonder, like, if that was the duty to stand up for the the health, safety, and welfare of the public, why, or, have we gone ahead and said, like, what other effects on our cities what effects on cities did segregation have? Why wasn't there more of a value judgment from architecture to write into code, or to stand up for and create those conversations, or have those value judgments? It's really important. Oh, wow. Thanks, JP. Thanks for the article. I recommend everybody give that a read. I'll have to do that after. But, here's this kind of, statement from the AIA. And again, it's like the AIA will say things like, we have to speak up for other people. And I'm still not sure what the AIA plans. I know that people I know who are there who are working on it. But, there's a pretty simple, it seems to me like a pretty simple, at least one very simple answer, or one very simple place we could go with some advocacy and say, hey, let's just, make gendered restrooms a thing of the past in public space. Easy. One hit. Just done. Right? Why are we still talking about it? Why are we still confused? Okay? It's a value judgment. So, okay. Still with me? Thank you. Number 2. Oh, yeah. Any questions? Or like, we could maybe do that. Rise in general. Oh yeah. I mean, I do. Thank you, Sirius Snape. I mean, I do think that we'd better see a rise in gender neutral restrooms in architecture and the built environment. Yes, I do. I think it's clear when we like, science fiction is a good example of, or dystopian societies or stories are a good example of using anecdotes to, describe or talk about a future scenario that seems like you take something to its logical conclusion. But I think we can also do that to take things to their logical conclusion for reasons to. Oh, here we go. Let me go here. Take ideas like this to their logical conclusion in a way to push society forward and say, yes, if gender neutral restrooms are something that is more efficient, they're less confusing, we don't have longer queues, we are safety is actually higher because there's less people, there's more eyes, there's more people in a restroom at once, right? It's a more public experience. Then yeah, like, go ahead, like, make that judgment, do it. Because I think that there are differences between, like, making restrooms gender neutral, which is usually just swapping the signs, because they're still built into the built environment as these two separate kind of, rooms. And that's difficult. When will we see completely total open, environments of just, hey, here's a big room with sinks, bathroom, and different types of bathrooms. And everybody just goes into it Everybody uses the facilities, washes their hands, and leaves. Like, that'll take a while because all of those things, all of those older restrooms are built into the environment, and it'll be a kind of thing where, like, you see leftover bits of code in, different older buildings have like really small doorways, right? Really tiny spaces, or a lot of steps without elevators or ramps, right? So we're going to see code change. If code changes, you're going to see like older buildings, quaint buildings will be ones that have like gender separated restrooms. It'll be like, oh, that's cute. Remember when we used to do that? Anyway,